Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, and welcome to yet another Pure Digital Passion podcast with Moses Kemibaro. And today I have guests from HID, which is a global identity company providing services across Africa with different organizations. Thank you very much for joining us, Colin and Natascha. So this morning, I'd like to maybe start with you, Colin. You're here obviously for this big conference with the ID4Africa.
Indeed.
And I'd like to maybe give us your origin story. Let's give it over your personal background, some of the key moments that led to your career working in international trade and document design.
Yes. So it's a long time ago now, Moses. But I started off in Central St Martin's, London University, and studying fine art and portraiture,
Okay.
which was really fascinated me because I love to connect with the human face. There's a
Okay.
real power looking into the eyes of and connecting with humanity in that sense, and so to draw and sketch people really fascinated me, and I never at that time imagined that this would go on to my first part of my career in banknote design, but indeed those opportunities opened up later on after university.
And how's that going so far?
Yeah, so really fascinating and interesting. After university, I was going to pursue a journalism career. I love writing and had already travelled a little bit around the world,
Okay.
and so interested in exploring different cultures and just global events. Current affairs has always been an interest of mine as well.
Yeah.
So. So on the back of that, after university, my English teacher actually had a colleague who was working for a company called Harrison and Sons in
Okay.
London,
Okay.
and there was an opportunity to go to the company and work with them for a week. And I didn't really know what that involved as such. I'd heard that they were doing some postage stamps
Hmm.
and working with King Charles on some castle drawings that he
Yes.
had developed. Anyway, I went in, I did my week with them, and they were just emerging and breaking into the banknote world and
Okay.
designing banknotes. And so I sat with some incredibly talented men and women, just five of them, very niche sector in banknote design. Two of the men involved in there were exhibiting in the Royal Academy of Art. One of them was painting these fine miniature portraits, and I just in that one week was so fascinated in this world that I'd never seen or never understood, and suddenly a banknote that I'd probably ignored in the past, the detail and the design, became something far more interesting to me.
Fantastic. Awesome. So maybe we'll move to you, Natascha. You can tell us maybe a little bit more about what HID does as a business, globally. You do
Sure.
have an impressive footprint, and I think partly why we're here today is because I've encountered your brand when I'm doing my internet banking. I've seen that you provide security within that, even in Kenya. And I'm just curious to understand a little bit about your background, what you do as an organization globally, but also what you're doing within the East African region.
We have dropped the global name a couple of months ago, actually. So HID is an identity solution provider located in the US, but we have offices around the world in Africa, in APAC, in Europe, Latin America. We belong to Assa Abloy, which is one of the biggest door opening companies in the world, actually, um, a Swedish one. Um, and yeah, we enable people to access things freely and travel safely. Um, Basically, so if we take the life of a person, for example, yes, so a child is born, you need to register the birth of this child somewhere. So we do a CRVS system, for example, which is a civil registry system. So where you kind of register all the important life events of a person. Yeah. So let's start there, and then that birth is registered once. This person will grow up at some point. It will start school. It will need maybe a student ID. So we provide the printers to print that. We provide the cards, the chips for that, chip operating systems. Um, then maybe that person will drive a car. It will need a driving
Exactly.
license. It will need to access a building to work or the university. It will work maybe in a sector where you need to track things, yeah, like animals, maybe, you know, these little tracking devices that
Yes,
the clips
yes.
in the ears of cows and stuff like
Correct.
this. Yeah. So that's also something that we do. So we are really, we, yeah, our company helps identify things and verify, and authenticate people, things, and places.
And this is really interesting because it seems to me that you cut across very many use cases. It's
Yes.
not just one thing. But what is the key importance of that? Identity as a requirement, or possibly the digital identity in this case, that from someone's birth all the way, presumably, to their death, you're able to sort of provide identity across different scenarios. Why is that so important?
Well, our business area, where me and Colin work specifically, we focus on citizen identity, meaning how the citizen identifies towards the government.
Yes.
And why is that so important? Because without an identity, without having a legal identity, you cannot access any public services, yeah,
Yes.
from the government, which means if the government never knows, for example, that you ever existed, you can't attend school, yeah.
Wow.
You can't open a bank account. If you can't open a bank account, you are not able to rent a house. If you can't rent a house, you cannot get an employment contract, and it is a vicious circle. You know, if you don't have that basic legal identity. And it doesn't necessarily have to be a document. It can be a fingerprint. It can be, um, it depends how you define identity then, yeah. But it is very crucial in order to have access to all these things in life. And if, many of us are very privileged and don't even think about the effects of what happens when you don't have that.
Wow.
Indeed, and also with healthcare. I
Yes.
mean, to have this ID, then that allows you to have that provision as well.
And I think probably one of the best things, I suppose, is that you're able to sort of interconnect or provide identity across different government services using a singular setup, I presume.
Yes, I mean that depends on the government very often. So
Yes.
we empower governments to help citizens access a better future. This is kind of our mission
The
as a
philosophy,
business
yeah.
area. Yeah. Um, and then it depends how the government sets that up. Yeah, is the government moving to a more digital infrastructure? Yeah, or does it provide national identity cards, or do you identify yourself with a mobile ID? Yeah, so that really depends. But we do offer the entire portfolio around that.
Fantastic. Colin, I'll come back to you. You have a rich history designing government documents and passports, including the award winning Estonian and UK passports. Not every day that I interview someone who's award winning. So, congratulations on that.
Thank
Could
you.
you talk us through your design process and how you approach designing something that not only needs to be functional, but also carries the identity of a person?
Yes. So the beginning of it is to sit down with the customer, and I always start off with the question, "What does your country mean to you?" And because I want to explore that theme, because they have a head start on me by being a national. So I spend a day asking those sort of questions, giving them time to think, and my notebook is full. And then I'm kind of ready to begin to explore some of those themes. Of course, often you're going to get a feeling that it's going to be designed by committee because everyone's going to have an
Mm,
opinion. Design is very subjective,
yes.
and so there's lots of voices. I like to give space and time to allow for the quieter voice also because they might have a great idea. And also, I encourage wild ideas because no idea is out of the question. So, and that's a really great learning process for me as well to engage with the customer from whatever country they're living in, and to find out more about that country. Then from that time, I normally have 2 or 3 days where I go off and travel myself. I'm a photographer as well, so I will
Okay.
capture a lot of my own images within those 3 or 4 days and try and travel as extensively as I can to just to be immersed in that country. From then I go back and start coming up with some conceptual designs.
Uh-huh.
Um, Often I can be confident enough to pitch one or two designs because that workshop has been so thorough that I've gauged by then quite a good indication of what the client or the customer wants. But there within our industry, a lot of ID documents, currency can be very traditional.
Mm.
And I'm a modernist, and I like to kind of break and push those boundaries. So, but nevertheless, some customers, they want to err on the side of caution,
Yeah.
and therefore they still want to have some of those traditional values in their document. So I offer one with a little bit, it's tempered back a little bit more. It's a little bit more traditional,
Mm.
but there's still an edge to it, and some modern themes introduced. And then I offer something far more thinking out of the box, and very modern. And from that stage, because even in that stage, incidentally, because that's the aesthetic, that's the theme, the thematic of the book. But even at that stage, I'm thinking, because of my 28, 30 years experience in ID design, I'm thinking how you will build there's a real science in our,
Yes.
work, and so I'm already thinking how we can build the security within that process and within those designs. So then I would go back normally to the country, or send my designs through, get some initial feedback, sit around a table again. It's all about collaboration. This is what HID Global do so well, I believe, because we sit and we don't pitch, we listen. And so I go back, you have to have thick skin as a designer, because
Mm.
there's a lot of critique, but you learn from critique. I sit down, I listen. But you also have to be confident in your own abilities, because if you've come up with a design that you're pleased with, and it's based on some of the themes and ideas that the customer has given you, then you can stay strong to that, and that's what I do. So once, hopefully, one of those concepts are agreed, and that's not always the case. Sometimes you have to go back and redo parts of it. It's unlikely after a workshop that you'd have to start again. So once that part is finished, which can be between 1, 2, and 3 months, then you start to take it to the next level. We get those concepts signed off, and then we begin to develop the secure stage, where we use a program called Corvina software. It's been developed in Hungary by JSP Jura. It's only available to central banks and security companies, security print companies. It's worth millions. Even the license itself, hundreds of thousands of pounds per license, per
Wow.
computer. And you have to have years of training. I mean, I started training in this software in 1998, and have been involved, actually going back to Budapest with them, talking about how, with the software developers, of things that we would like to see in the
Enhancements
future, and
and
enhancements that we can see in the documents. And so that's the next stage. It's a stage of taking that imagery, whether it's an abstract design, whether it's more based around topography or photographic images, whatever it is, we then will secure that with line modulations,
I
watermarks.
don't even know what that means.
No. So this is a whole different world, and this is why, when I did the talk yesterday, for example, at ID4Africa, people suddenly pay attention to what's in their document, because unless they see in detail what goes into a passport, then people are never aware. They're often not aware of the subject matter. But then when you look at the detail that goes into those books, there's a real interest and fascination into that as well.
A
Because
passport, actually, sorry,
yeah,
just jumping in. A passport is actually made out of more than 40 components. So you don't really realize that, and the amount of artwork that goes into that. So when he talks then about the artwork that needs to be introduced into a security concept, it basically means that, if you take a magnifier, for example, and look at the document, you can see that there are little words written that you cannot see with the pure eye, for example. Yeah. So you have a tree, for example, that is the pure art, but the branches of the tree will then, in a security concept, will have little words, for example, and maybe there's a little mistake in that word, so that if someone wants to forge that document, they would need to replicate and know exactly that this word is, for example, written wrong in that space.
Wow.
And this is really hard, right? Because you can't really know a document so well. And these little secrets are all over this document, basically, yeah, using different inks, different technologies to create security around it and security features that have been once just a design concept, yeah.
I find it fascinating because on one hand, I think the way the process starts is very creative.
Yeah.
It starts off with that immersion in the country and the
Yes.
philosophies and the
Yes.
ethos, and then you sort of start from that point and now gradually get all the way down to the fact that the security and the design are actually integrated and they
Yes.
come together.
Yes.
And then of course that's backed by the proprietary technologies that allow you to then verify and validate
Yes.
that this
Yes.
passport is indeed authentic.
Yes.
Yes,
And
exactly.
I think I mentioned earlier today when we were having a conversation that I do happen to have a passport that I believe has your security chip. And also the fact that when you do go through immigration, the way it streamlines that process for you, the fact that it's smooth and sort of unconstrained. Maybe you can talk a little bit about that, Natasha,
Sure.
if you'd like to. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, yes, we actually do the Kenyan passport at the moment, and Colin has actually designed it, right? So,
Yes.
yeah, so we have a lot of experience there. Um, a good design is also a design that is easily usable at a border, for example. And that always depends how a country is set up in that kind of sense. Yeah. Do you have a manual border control? So where you have a border control officer sitting, for example, who will inspect your document and read certain information out of it. Or you have sometimes also automatic border control systems
Correct. Yeah.
where you can just go through the border with your passport very easily. Yeah. So in order to be able to do that, you do need an e-passport.
Correct.
So if how do you know you have an e-passport? So if you look at the cover, there's usually a gold embossing of the country's emblem or something like this, and then down underneath that you see a little camera sign. So that means that it is an e-passport, meaning that there is a chip somewhere in that document, mostly in the cover or in the data page, yeah, which
Okay.
is the page where all the personal information is held, yeah, the picture of the document holder and so on. So yeah, and that facilitates obviously the border control because the chip is read, and then you can just and the machine is comparing the information and the pictures, because you have on the chip, you actually have the biometric information, like the fingerprint, for example, stored. Yeah. So that, or a picture of the passport holder. So then the facial camera comes usually at the border control and like takes your picture, compares it to the one in the chip and in the document, and then lets you through it. Yeah. But this is kind of the digital security on the document, which
Yeah.
is why a lot of countries are moving now to e-passport. We have also moved a lot of African countries to e-passport, actually. There are still a couple of countries that are trying to do that or wanting to do that in the future, and we really hope to be able to support them. But yeah, that's just the digital component to it. Forgery is always also catching up somehow, yeah. So that's why we do encourage countries to redesign their documents every at least 10 years, yeah, because as much as innovation is happening in that sector, also people that shouldn't be able to replicate certain things just catch up on technology, right? So I mean, cyber threats or identity theft have not been the case a couple of years ago, you know.
Yeah.
So obviously threat is always coming, and yeah, so
Yeah.
physical design is really important as well. Yeah.
Okay.
Definitely, and just to touch on that part of the counterfeiting, I have the privilege to work with NDFU, which is National Fraud Identity, in London, and they find any of the worldwide. This is globally, any of the counterfeits, passports or ID documents that are discovered, whether that's at the immigration desk or in an airport, wherever that may be, and brought back to London to analyse. And so I sit in a workshop with those for a day, and we look at where those specific documents have been targeted. And this is enormously helpful for me as a designer, because of course then I can see where the potential threat is. And
Okay.
more and more in a document, it would be on the biodata page. And because a counterfeiter doesn't want to spend an entire month or a year even trying to counterfeit every single page. So what we've been seeing in the industry, and this has been a real change and a shift over the last 5-10 years, is page substitution, where they will literally just take out the biodata page, which has been stitched in. So they will carefully unstitch it and replace it with a different biodata page, because of course then they don't have to replicate the entire book or indeed the page itself. And so to counteract that and to enhance what Natascha was saying, the polycarbonate page is
The
not only
plastic one.
the plastic one is not only held in with stitching. We put in different safeguards within that to counter the threat of page substitution. For example, HID Global use something called SafeLink, which is a UV, two working UV color, which goes onto that biodata page into something called the hinge. The hinge is what holds that page now into the book, and it actually goes behind the spine of the book, so you can see the fold the other side.
I should have brought a passport.
Yeah,
Huh?
yeah. Any counterfeiter that tries to tamper with that page, you can instantly see that has been tampered with, either by seeing that the security print has now changed, or indeed the hinge itself.
Wow. I'll never look at my passport the same way again.
No.
Never, ever, ever. So I'd like to come back to you, Natascha. And I think, you're obviously in Nairobi. You're here this week for the ID4Africa Conference, which I believe is ending today. And I'd just like to understand a little bit more about why HID is here for this event, why you're participating, and more importantly, going forward, what does that mean for HID, possibly in East Africa and Africa?
ID4Africa is a show, a trade show, which is held once a year in a different African country. So it's really focused on the African continent. Last year it was in Morocco. This year it is in Nairobi, and I believe next year it will be in South Africa.
Okay.
And for us, obviously, and for the entire market, it is a very important market, Africa, yeah, because as I mentioned, a lot of countries have already moved to e-passport, but there are always enhancements to just keep up to date, yeah, with the newest technologies and the threats that are coming. So you always need to be working on the next generation, basically, yeah. But also, there are still a couple of countries who have not made that step to e-passport, yeah. And then, do you want to facilitate travel in a way to implement border control solutions? Do you want to? We do have biometric enrollment devices, for example. How can they facilitate maybe border control as well? When you travel to some countries, they capture your fingerprints. So that's also something that we are doing, for example. It is not needed in Europe, for example, because within the Schengen area, of course, you can just travel freely. But I believe in Africa, for example, this is still happening in many countries. Yeah. So yeah. And then obviously, I think I think Africa has so much economic growth potential, and in order to be growing economically, you do need a reliable identity. You do need to have trust, and that's not only for the individual but for businesses. They need to know that the person that maybe they work with, the person that they hire, the products they buy, that all these interactions are based on the knowledge that it is what it is, or the person is who he is. So if you don't have that trust, you cannot, there can not be a prosperity really in business. Yeah. So it is, identity in general is a basic requirement for economic growth. Yeah. And I think we see that people want to travel more as well in Africa. So streamlining these processes is also really important. And yeah, so I think there are a lot of opportunities here, yeah, to make the life of the private sector and for citizens just easier in many ways.
Great. Colin, I'd like to come back to you. So you've been recognized for your work on the Kenyan passport and many other African passports as well. And I'd like to maybe hear from you in terms of what are the unique challenges you face, doing this kind of work in Africa, and possibly how do you see that affecting the whole area of identity and the citizens that are using your products throughout Africa?
Well, I started off my career, as I said, in banknote design, and I remember designing the Kenya Shilling in 1992 with His Excellency Daniel Moy.
Wow.
And so
That
that's
far
good.
back, huh?
Yeah, that's for
Wow.
that far back. I know I don't look quite that old, but yeah. So and even then there were some challenges. Of course, I've mentioned earlier about design by committee. Lots of different opinions. I then went on to design the Kenya passport. I think it's certainly in Africa, in East Africa, the country is so diverse. There's so much subject matter. I touched on this in my talk yesterday in ID4Africa, and this is why these workshops are so important. But more and more, I like to have a narrative running through a passport, a story, rather than trying to capture everything, because this is a real challenge in a book. Often less is more is a current
Mm.
trend that we're seeing in passports, and yet governments, presidents, they're so excited and passionate and proud of their nation that they want to represent it as a whole. And I can understand that, because you've got marginalized people. You might want to you want to be inclusive, but at the same time, by trying to do that, you open up a whole can of worms, and because you already you're going to miss out something or someone. Hence why we often use wildlife. In the case of the Kenya passport, which is now due an upgrade, I believe, and that's what we talked about yesterday. But we looked at the big five. One of the challenges in design is, of course, the big five. I've seen them on the South African currency, and so how do we look at that? How can we do something a little bit different? Um, I wanted the Kenyan people to recognize these animals, the lion and the elephant. Um, and the water buffalo. But in the
Mm.
same sense, I wanted there to be some more subtle undertones in the
Mm-hmm.
design. So we put in the background the hide or the fur of that creature hidden in the detail in the background of that passport. Yesterday, when I made the address, I don't think there were any Kenyans in the audience who had ever noticed that element
Ah.
of detail in there, despite, of course, having had those conversations and some of those ideas being agreed. So I think some of for me now, after having two back-to-back workshops with the Minister of the Interior here in Kenya, when they flew across to the UK with me, and we looked at in depth of some of the emerging things that are happening in Kenya. I think the greatest challenge will be now finding a narrative, a subject that represents Kenya, something fresh, something new, because there's actually too much choice. You're renowned for athletics, for example.
Mm-hmm.
You could do an entire book just on long distance running. Why not? Why not have each page with somebody
Yeah.
running through the book? You're renowned for now women empowerment. You could tell an entire story around that, or the way that you're building on infrastructure here throughout East Africa. So these are some of the things that are now I'm beginning to think about in my head, and how we can develop the next book.
And again, you have to sort of cherry pick, what is
You do.
representative of the times, right?
Yeah, exactly.
I know that the running and maybe the coffee, the tea, the animals is all somewhat a little bit cliche at this point. But
Yes.
there are also these emerging things, especially in my line of work, which is technology,
Yes.
where we're seeing, Kenya is now called the Silicon Savannah.
Right.
It's known as the home of mobile money. These are sort of becoming endemic or very clearly defining Kenya as a pioneer within the African space. So I can imagine the sort of the challenge you have, therefore, to kind of see like what represents the times of Kenya today, and how does that then become visible in eventually the passport that we're going to have.
Yeah, well, you've just given me another 2 insights, Moses, another 2 ideas. I need to include you in the next design workshop.
Yeah, we're very proud of that
absolutely.
reputation. The technology side of things,
Yeah,
fantastic.
yeah,
Yeah.
and rightly so. And you know, as you said, I mean, that could be a subject that we could explore as a whole.
And actually, the current president, His Excellency President Ruto, recently there was an event where they were launching a new fintech product called Fingo, and it's 24 years old. The founders are 24 years old, and they've launched this thing with EcoBank, which is one of the largest banks across the continent. And he was very, very adamant that he wants to sort of prioritize the youth, what he likes to call the hustler nation.
Yes.
Where building technologies, building opportunities for young people. So it might be a great opportunity, I think, to sort of showcase that for the next 10 years, as it
Yes.
were, because it is definitely an area where there's a great deal of momentum in Kenya, but also across the African continent.
Yes, He
yeah.
touched on that yesterday and talking about empowering the youth, and that's something that we're really passionate about at HID Global as well.
Yeah.
And if I can involve the youth and talk to them and hear from their level
Exactly.
what their expectations would be in a new document, I think that would be a really fresh perspective as well.
Yeah.
We have done something similar. I mean, it was after the passport launch, but in Bahrain, we went to the university and presented the passport, for example, to art students and security graphic students, architecture students.
Fantastic.
And that was just an amazing feedback that we got.
Oh, incredible. At the end of that, they were studying architecture, even economics. And there were students coming up and saying, this has been life enhancing to know that we now can carry our new e-passport and be so proud that you've represented our pearling history, our governance, the Formula One, all of these things. And having heard that we had worked at the level with the Crown Prince as well and heard some of his opinions and included them in that book, was so fascinating for them and definitely empowered them as well. And I think gave them a real confidence and a belief that they can go on to do more as well. Yeah, definitely.
Fully represented, yeah.
Absolutely, yeah.
It can be quite tricky because actually Canada has just launched their new passport design. And it is always also a political decision, yeah? How do you want to show your country, yeah? And in the media, at least, it was said that it represents more kind of the past and not so much the future. So it is, it can be a tricky thing. So
finding that balance, the heritage and the way forward.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Do you want to focus on that or that? Yeah. And
Yeah.
that really depends sometimes on the government, how they see that, how they think. Yeah.
Okay. Maybe I'll come back to you, Natascha.
Sure.
I'd like to maybe ask a little bit more about HID, Identity Solutions, East Africa, Kenya. What's in the market? What are you bringing to market? Maybe you can tell us a little bit more about that.
We do offer the entire, basically, journey around a citizen's life and how they identify themselves throughout their life towards the government. And within that, we are building ID systems, for example, in Africa as well. We are collaborating with the governments to facilitate the access to identity through digitization, basically. Yeah. So, for example, for Tanzania, we moved that country to an e-passport, but we also reduced the touch points to actually get that identity document, the passport, by I think 55%. So before that,
very streamlined now.
Very much more streamlined, yeah. Because when you have a country where the population does not necessarily live in the capital, but all over the area, and the infrastructure sometimes maybe is not as built out, then it might take you 4 hours to get to the capital to apply for your identity document, whichever that is, yeah. And if that process is not streamlined enough, then it means that you might need to go first to apply, first to enroll, first to pay, a second time to pay, a third time to go and get another signature, a fourth time to collect it, or to, it really depends how the process goes. But that can be inconvenient and also lead to people not wanting to do that, yeah, or not being able to do. I mean, if you have a family, you work, you have a busy life. You cannot, you cannot travel these distances all the time to get an identity document, yeah. But that at the end leaves you lacking something really important actually in your life. Yeah. So digitizing these processes and streamlining application processes, enrollment, issuance processes around identity documents. This is something that we have done for many countries, and that we are, doing, for example, for Tanzania as well. And then I think the next step now is moving countries to possibly, mobile identity. We have actually, I mean, it's not Africa, but we have implemented the first national mobile ID in Argentina, for example. Yeah. And we see a lot of countries around the globe, Africa,
How does
looking
that
at.
work exactly, if I may ask?
Yeah, they can, they have a mobile a card on their phone.
Okay.
And they can identify themselves towards the government with that. Yeah, they can access services with that.
This is using the SIM?
Yes.
Okay. So it acts as the...
It's an app. It's an
Oh,
app
it's
on
an
the
app.
phone.
Okay,
Yes,
okay,
exactly.
okay.
With all the required information. And we see, for example, also already countries, um, implementing that kind of processes for travel. We
Oh,
see
okay.
that, I mean, there are standard organizations around civil aviation.
Okay.
It's called ICAO, for example. It's in Montreal. Because, as you might have noticed, every passport looks the same. So there's someone who has to define that, that the picture is there, it has to be like this, the name is like this, and
All the standards,
all
yeah.
the standards, exactly, so that people can actually use that document. And that organization is also already looking into digital travel credentials. How can we travel without the physical identity document, without the physical passport? And there are some bilateral agreements that already facilitate or pilot programs which are looking into that. I think on a global level it will take a couple of years still, and I don't think that the physical document will become unimportant, but it is the next step, I would say.
Yeah, and I think that evolution is inevitable because, let's be honest, the common denominator today is everyone has a smartphone.
Yes, exactly.
And most people, even in Kenya, are transitioning to smartphones.
Yes.
And I imagine that when you think about the computing power and the capabilities, identity is obviously one of the things that it can do. So I'm keen to see that. And I imagine the likes of Estonia, which is very progressive, must be already playing in that space, right?
Estonia is one of the most digitized countries in terms of government services. I think we once looked into some studies. I think it was 99% or something like this
Wow.
of government interactions are already digital. They already do also voting digitally and all kinds of things. Yes.
So maybe I'd like to come back to you again, Colin, and you can share with us what are sort of the design trends you see when it comes to identity solutions. What is the way forward, the next 2 to 5 years, perhaps? What are the trends going forward? What do you see happening?
Yeah. So I certainly cross-page design. So by that, what do I mean? I mean, when you look at a visa page, the center page is in a book. We are tending now to have the photograph image or whatever we're using cross-paging over the spine of the book. So this is something that we've introduced. Also, I believe less is more. So concentrating on maybe a purity within the book, and so looking at one subject as we mentioned, but not overcomplicating it, because you can still make a book very secure by keeping it simple in the sense of a photographic image, or whether you use typography. This is another current trend that we're seeing: typography styles, different fonts emerging. For example, you could do a new passport design based around a font. In fact, when we did the Estonia book, they had their own font that we implemented into the book. So this is another idea. I think some of the other trends, certainly with HID Global, what we're exploring is in the gold blocking. And Natascha's already mentioned that in the gold blocking, if you look at any document at the moment, you'll see a crest on the front, and it'll be in this bold gold. Well, we're now looking, and we've experimented with it, and we're ready to launch it, where you're looking at different gold blocking colors, including white and blue. So you can introduce those as a trend onto your front cover. And then, of course, on your end pages, you have what's called intaglio print. And
pages are the ones that are glued to the cover.
Oh, okay, yes.
Yeah. Sometimes I assume of course, not being in our industry,
I don't understand the subject
it's very
matter.
complex. So the intaglio print, it's a raised print. It's
Okay.
very difficult to counterfeit. There's things that you can hide within that print, things like a latent image, where you hold that printer at a certain angle, and embedded and hidden into it is letters or yeah, a graphic, for example. So in the Kenya book, we have the word Kenya hidden in the intaglio print, but we can explore more ideas around the intaglio, 2 and 3 color intaglio printing, which is a great deterrent against counterfeiting. And so that's something that we're exploring as well. And to have that intaglio going over, crossing once again beneath that spine.
Man, I will never look at my passport the same again. Honestly, I feel like I've just gotten a mini MBA on passport design and identity. Yeah, so I think we're coming to the end of our session, and I think I'd like to come back to you again, Natascha. If you have any final remarks, anything you think that would be valuable to know by our audience today.
It's like Colin said, it's really great um, to look at your identity document, look at it maybe from a more interested perspective, how much effort is going into it, valuing the fact that you have that travel document, that you can travel freely and securely around the world, that you actually have an identity.
Yeah.
These are important things that we don't appreciate, I think, sometimes enough in life. And yeah, it's nice to point that out, I think. Yeah.
I definitely appreciate it a lot more today. Thanks to your sharing. Colin, final remarks.
Well, I think on the back of ID4Africa, what I'm excited about is just the interaction. After my talk yesterday, I've run out of business cards. I had hundreds of conversations, and we've been able to now set up various design workshops throughout East Africa and beyond. So I'm going to have a busy few months ahead, Moses, and this is something I'm passionate about, getting out into the territory, talking to the people, hearing their voice, and coming up with some, we talked about these new emerging trends, representing these nations throughout Africa. I'm excited and passionate about that. I want to open up that engagement throughout these different regions, hear those opinions, and collaborate together, explore potential themes, ideas, modernize these books that have maybe lay dormant for the last 10 years, and come up with some great new solutions for this region. And it's a region that I have been exploring for the last 30 years, and one of my favorite, my favorite continent here on Earth. So I can't wait to be back on African soil underneath this hot sun, and just enjoying that whole process of designing ID and passport documents for Africa.
Well, thank you so much, Colin. Thank you, Natascha. It's been a real pleasure. I really feel schooled in all things identity and passports and banknotes and all the detail that goes into that. I think for me, that's really why we do this podcast. We really want to sort of unpack and share in a very easy way things that are really interesting. And really, for me, the biggest excitement was, encountering HID when I used my banking services, and I was like, wow, I need to talk to these guys. I need to see what they're doing. So thank you so much for being on the podcast. Thank you, all of us, for joining us today to listen to the Pure Digital Passion podcast with Moses Kemibaro. We'll catch you in the next one.